So now we will be discussing upon a newer topic, which is data validation. Now, with respect to the name of the topic, what do you understand? That there is a data, there is a value, there is an element, and we are going to validate it. So, with respect to this topic, what we are going to understand? First of all, what is a data validation? Second, why do we require a data validation? And third, that how do we implement a data validation with certain restrictions? So, first of all, what is a data validation and why do we require it? Imagine for an example that this is a table. Now in this table that I have certain columns such as ID, name, age, location and salary. So this data is related to the employee's information, and in those IDs that I have number of the IDs, that is 101, 102, 103, 104, 105 and so on. But if I possibly type in A in the ID wala part, that information seems to be incorrect. But with respect to the basic approach of Excel, a sheet, a cell can accept any value which is there. So we won't be applied to restrict that A would not be possibly available at that particular position by default. So here you can see when I enter A over there, it's a wrong information which is there. So now you can see name, Ria, Raj, Eric, which is still fine. Now if you see age, now in that age, you could possibly see 1000 as an age is obviously not possible for an employee to have. So that age element is incorrect. That cell value, even though it's a number, it's an incorrect element. If you can see 23 as an age, okay, it's fine. If you see minus 10, employee's age obviously could not be minus or a negative element. But I'm entering a number and Excel cells can accept anything within them. So location, if you can see, I have location as Mumbai, I have location as Chennai, but do you think so I will have location known as Priya? Obviously that element is incorrect over here. Salaries, if you see for an example that 1000 or the salary is into a negative element or 0.6, that possibly value is incorrect over here. But how does Excel understand that these values are incorrect? This values needs not to be there, or we don't allow this kind of elements or this kind of value. So at that particular approach, we use something called as data validation. Now, if I want to talk and discuss about data validation is a feature in Excel which is used to control that what a user wants to enter into a cell. Because by default, a user can enter anything into a cell. But if you apply certain rule to the cell, user can specify that what you want to enter and what that cell will ideally accept as a value. So you can use data validation to make sure a value is a number, a date, or has a certain drop-down menu or anything of your choice, which is required to the user. So data validation, as the name suggests, the values, that's the data, it will be validated. Validated means before entered, it will be checked. Now checked on the basis of what? On the basis of restrictions which we require. So for that, we will implement certain data validation which will show me a correct tick if the value is correct or a cross tick if the value is incorrect. For an example, we could use data validation to make sure that the number is between 1 to 6. We can use date occurs with respect to the next 30 days or make sure the text has less than 25 characters or anything. Now data validation can also simply display us an error message, a warning or some input guidance that what we can validate and what we can use in order to telling and specifying user that what is the restriction which is available to these cells. So when I talk and discuss about data validation, obviously it's a data related operation. So it's available to us in the data tab. So in that data tab, you can see data tools and then there is a validity check, the validity group or the control which will help us to apply this data validation. If you can see the symbolic representation of that, there is a cell block and then there is a red stop icon and then there is a blue tick, which means If the value is correct, it will insert it correctly. If the value is incorrect, according to the restrictions, it will stop. It will not make it enter. So that's an option. Now in that we have three more options. First is settings, that what restrictions we want to give. First is settings and what restrictions we want to give. Then there is an error message. Then there is an input message, which we will see eventually. And this is how certain rules are implemented. And here you can see with an example that as a message said that please enter a 4-digit number from 1000 to 9999 and so on. But when the person is entering 106, it is restricting. It is not allowing it to enter as such. So this is some level of data validation which we will try to incorporate. Now with respect to data validation, we will try to solve certain questions which I have. The very first is employee IDs must be between 1001 to 2000. The age of the employee must be greater than 21. The employee joining date must be less than the current date. The departments must be from the provided list. The contact number must be a 10-digit number. Email of the employee must contain a domain which is like this. Gender must be only female and male, and the project code which is possibly available to us must be a 4-digit letter starting with A. So you can see there are lots of validation, lots of restrictions which are required. But let's try to see one by one. But if you see all those questions are related to the HR data. So let's create all these things from scratch and let's start. So as I discussed that data validation is something which will help us to restrict the elements which are there. But if you see by default, let's say I create employee ID, which is the first restriction which is required. And let's say we have this name, we have this email, we have this departments, and we have the rest of the elements which are there. So let's say we have gender and so on. So let's say there is age and so on. So you could see these are the columns which are required for us in terms of data validation. Let me just use the home tab in order to do this. Let me fix the width of them. So I fixed the width of them over here. Do it from this. That is fixed accordingly. So this I have fixed. So it's my preferred approach in order to give borders or colors to the cell so that it helps me to distinguish that these are the headers of my data. Now, one thing, if I say that, as I discussed with an example, 101, obviously a cell can accept. If I write A hashes, it can accept. If I write this, is my cell accepting? Yes. So if you can see, by default, any value is being accepted into the cell. But I don't want any value to be accepted over here. Because certain of the time, I want the data to be appropriate. I don't want any errors or mistyping into the data or data typing errors which could possibly occur, and that can make my analysis wrong. So at that particular instance, I will add something called as data validation. So how I will do? First of all, let me select this and press the delete key. Now you know that when you press the delete key, all the selected cell elements will go. You don't have to press a backspace because it will just remove from the first cell. So it's my preferred approach that till the element you apply data validation, please try to put in borders. Reason, because it becomes very easy to determine that till this the data validation has been implemented. Obviously, I can drag down if I have implemented on certain cells and it will be proceeded further. But I don't want to randomly select cells and give data validation over here. So I have selected this region and I have pressed in the borders, and you can see I want to implement data validation only till here. I don't want to implement for the entire sheet. why I have given this borders and why I have selected this. Now it's a preferred approach. You can try to avoid it as well, or this is just and not a mandate approach as such, but you can do it so that it better up the task in terms of data validation. So if I randomly select certain cells and then apply data validation, and then after that I forgot that till when I applied or till where I applied the data validation. So later stage, if I'm working on the sheet, it becomes difficult for me to understand that why these errors are coming, because I don't know what is the restriction until where the restriction has been implemented. So it's my preferred way that I select a range of cells and till here I am implementing data validation. So till there I have given borders to the cell. So it becomes very easy for me to distinguish that here the data validation is there and for the rest of them it's not. But you can ideally avoid this process and you can directly do by selecting the cells. So if I do this, if I select this and I want to implement data validation. Now, as I said, as the task is related to data. So obviously in Excel we have some data related tab which helps to do the same operation. So we can go with Alt into the data tab. So Alt and A, which will allow me to reach the data tab. And you can see in the data tools option we have to go. So there is V where we'll find the data validation. But I'll press escape and it's gone. So you can also select from the menu bar that, let's say you're in home, you go in data, and then there is validation rules. So when I click on this, you can see it itself mentioned picks from a list of rules to limit, which means it will pick up from the multiple rules which are possibly available to us in terms of limiting the type of data that can be entered in the cell, which means what type of data is required within the cell. For example, you can provide a list of elements like 1, 2, 3, or only allow numbers greater than thousands, which are there as valid entries. So that's there. So we can use it. Now let's say I've selected this cell, I go in data validation. And you could see that same options are available. First is settings, then there is an input message, and then there is an error alert. But let's go in the one step-by-step approach. I'll go in settings, and if you can see the validation criteria, the allowment criteria, by default what it is there, it's any value. Which means when you were trying to use it, initially when I was typing 101, it was accepting. When I was typing A and slashes, it was accepting, because the by default use case of a cell is to accept any value, any cell elements. But now I want to change this rule with respect to any value to something different. So when I click on this drop down, you can see multiple rules are available. First is a whole number, second is a decimal, third is a list, date, then you have time, then you have text length and customized option. So that is there. So you can see that multiple elements are possibly available to us. So what is this? So any value, I don't want it. I want what? A whole number. So you can see when I selected a whole number, there is a multiple options related to data. So your data needs to be between this to this, not between, equals to, not equals to, greater than, less than, greater than equals to, less than equals to, and so on. And then if you select a between, there would be obviously a start value, that's a minimum value, and end value, that's a maximum value. If you go with not equals to, obviously you can see those value elements which are available, that not equals to what? What is the value which you don't want the data to be not equals to? So that is there. So as you change the data rules, the value implementation or the value restrictions will also change. So let's go on the question that what we want to find. So if you could see what we want to find, the employee IDs must be between 1001 to 2000, which means the employee IDs which are given to each employee, obviously starting from 1001 and the end employee number is 2000. I don't want any IDs with after or apart from this range. So I cannot use the basic rule. So I cannot use the basic rule of implementation. Obviously, I need to go in data validation. So I cannot use the basic rule over here. I need to go in data validation. So I've selected this cell. I went into the data tab in the data tools, the data validation, and then you can see a value, but I wanted a whole number. Why I have selected a whole number or not any other option? Because 1001 to 2000 and ID cannot be 1001.5, 1001.35, 36. It could not be. So obviously I will use a whole number because IDs are going to be a whole number, and they are between because I don't want an IDs apart from 1001 to 2000. So what I am doing, I am writing a minimum element. What's the minimum element? It starts from 1001. So 1001 being inclusive in nature. Now what is an inclusive? That is start value will be included if you try to input. You can do 2000 over here. So that's the range within which I want the data to be accepted. So I've selected this and I do OK. So here you can see no changes seen, but let's try to enter certain values. 101. Can you see a message popping out? This value does not match the data validation restrictions defined for the cell. Why do you think so this has came? Because I have now set up rules for those set of cells or those range of cells that it is going to accept only the values between 1001 to 2000. As 101 being an element which is not into the restricted cells or the restricted rules. So that's why it is throwing me an error. So you can see the value does not match the data validation restrictions or the rules defined for this cell, for this range. So I can do retry. Let's try 1004. Is it going to accept? Yes. Why? Because it was 1001 to 2000. So let me randomly pick in. So 1006. You could see it's dollar. So let me make it general. I can go and it's general over here. So you could see that these elements are there. So obviously I'm trying to incorporate over here. These are the elements. So if I try to enter over here, again this rule arises because it's not a part of the restriction. So is 1001 accepted over here? The answer is yes. So you can see 1001 is accepted. Even the 2000s would be accepted. 1200, 1298, 1678. I'm randomly inserting these elements. So these are the employee IDs which I want. I cannot give this. So here you can see. So these are certain employee IDs which I have tried to insert, and all were having these data restrictions. Now if I drag this element down, you could see it's there, but if I try to implement 3000, is it allowing me to enter? No, because when I drag the element down, as I have mentioned earlier, the cursor, as I have mentioned earlier, this cursor, in order to drag or bring the elements down, what it will do, if the formula is available, it will copy the formula. If the value is available, it will bring out the values. If the format is available, it will bring out the formats which are there. So you can see when I drag this, the validation has also been dragged to certain cells. So it's not like once you have selected the range of cells and only till there the validation is applied. If you want to extend it, you can extend it like this. So I hope this is clear. So this was the first rule in terms of data validation, that how you can implement a data validation. But what if this file I am using and now I'm sharing with you that I want you to enter the data over here. But obviously there is a data validation implemented by me and I know what is the rule being set. But do you guys know that what rule has been set? So how you will get to know that this rule has been set? Or when you are entering values, you are getting errors, but how you will determine that why these errors are coming? You obviously think that there is an issue in the file, but obviously not. There is no any other issue in the file. The issue or the problem is lying into the data validation restrictions which you have implemented. But there is no message being throwing that this is what you want to enter. So if we want a message to be there, which makes the task easy in order to enter the data, in order to suggest the other person who will be using this file, so that he also understands that some restrictions are being available. So how we can input a message over here in order to make sure that what data needs to be inserted. So I can go in the data tab again and select the data validation option. So when I select it, I will not be into the settings anymore. I will go to the next option possibly available, that's an input message. Now what's an input message? What is the title which I'll give? Let's say I give a title as correct data. So I can give any title as such. So the employee IDs must be between let's say between 1001 to 2000. So this is a restriction, but I am personalizing a message over here. If I don't want it, I can do clear also, it will show. So show input message when the cell is selected. So let's see how does it look. I do okay. And you could see when I'm in this cell, what it is, a pop-up is coming to me that correct data. It's a title of that pop-up, and what it is, the employee IDs must be between 1001 to 2000. So input message as a feature into data validation makes it good in terms of explaining or giving a personalized message when a data validation is implemented, so that when another person is working on the same, he or she will get to know that what data needs to be inserted over here. So as now I am using it, I know that the data must be between 1001 to 2000. So this is how we solve the very first question in terms of implementing data validation. So now, as we discussed about the first question in terms of implementing a data validation with respect to the basic rule of whole number, let's try to understand the second question, which is age of the employee must be greater than 21. Obviously, that age as an element would also be a whole number. You can add a decimal, but it's fine that you can add a whole number over here. So how we can proceed with this type of restriction? So how we can proceed with this type of restriction? So if I go in this and age as a column is where I want to implement a restriction. Now what's the restriction? That the age must be greater than 21. So I write 23, it's accepted. I write A, it's accepted. Why? Because by default still it has any value as an element. The restriction or the data validation which we had tried to implement, it's only on this certain cells, and when you see, so the restriction and the data validation is only applicable on this certain cells. So when I go and select this cells, there is an input message being popped up that this is the correct data which you want to enter. And this is restricted only to those limited cells or limited cell ranges. When I go on the next cell, there is no certain restriction being implemented, which means it can still accept any value. So if I go in this, you can see that A has been written and A has been accepted. If I write -0, that is still being accepted. If I write minus a bigger number, you can see this is being accepted, but I don't want this values to be incorporated over here. So what I can do is, I'll first select this, I'll press a delete key to remove all the cell values from the selected cells. I will go into the data tools and I'll implement a data validation and I'll go in the settings. You can see by default what it is doing, it is allowing any value for us. I'll go in any value. Now you could select a whole number, obviously age can be a whole number, but let me show you that a decimal could be used like this. Now you want it between or not. So you want it greater than what? Now like between as a data selecting operation, like between over here, there is a minimum and maximum. Minimum and maximum means between a start value to an end value. But I don't want a between. I want that now it should be greater than. Greater than what? Greater than the value, the minimum value which I am implemented over here is 21. That greater than, it will obviously not take 21 over here because it's an option of greater than. If I would have selected greater than equals to, so it will consider 21 as well because I am writing greater than or equals to. But I am just mentioning greater than, so the values which are greater than 21 would be accepted. And I do OK. So you could see that 21 would not be accepted because this value does not match the data validation restrictions defined for the cell because it's greater than 21. It's not greater than or equals to. So let me try it again. So if I write 23, is it accepting? Yes. If I write A, which I mentioned earlier, it will not accept because there is a restriction still being implemented. But I implemented a decimal type of restriction. So will the decimal be a part over here? Let's say some individual write 24.5 is my age. Is it accepted? Yes. If someone writes 67 is my age, is it accepted? Yes. If I write 34 as my age, is it accepted? Yes. If I write 23 point, a floating value, so it will be accepted? Yes. But if I go on this first restriction which I implemented, which was between 1001 to 2000, if I try to write 1004.5, if I try to write decimal, so it will throw me what? An error. Why an error? Because a restriction which was selected over here was a whole number. But the restriction which I tried to select over here when I gave it for the age as a column or age range cells, it was a decimal, which means it will accept an integer value, a whole number, as well as a floating elements, that's a decimal number into it. So you could see with an example that yes, it is accepting a whole number for me as well as the decimal ranges for me. So this is how I have implemented. I can also input an input message over here. So I can go over here. You can see that the settings are being implemented. I can insert an input message. So correct age. So I'll write the age of the employee must be what? Must be greater than 21. So, and I do OK. And you can see this dialog box is opening, this input message or the input box is opening for each cell till where I have implemented the data validation. If I drag it down, what do you think? So is this input message being repeated over here? Yes, because when I drag it, the values, the formulas, the format, the validation, everything is being copied down. So you can see this is how I can implement a decimal related operation. But age, as in general, you can also implement a whole number. There is no such restriction, but I just wanted to show you how the decimal as a restriction would work as compared to the whole number as such. So when I select this range of cells where I have implemented this, and when I try to insert a value over here, let's say I want to insert 45 and it's giving me error. If there is an employee whose age is 20, when I try to enter, obviously it will show me that it does not match the restrictions defined for the cell. Now, what do you think so? Should I customize this error message according to my requirements over here? So how I could do? I could possibly do, let me do retry and remove it. I'll come out and in the selected range of cells, what I'll do, I'll go in data validation again. We saw settings in which we can implement the rules and restrictions. We saw that input message. In that, we can give an input message in order to let know the user that what is the correct value which will be incorporated. And then there is something called as error alert, which means I can customize the error. So there are multiple symbols such as stop, warning, and information. Let's say I use stop and the title. Error, and let me type in the error message. The age you entered is incorrect. So I write this that the age which you have entered is incorrect and I do OK. So when I type in an age over here, let's say the age, the next age which I want to use is 30. It's accepted 20. It's an error because it's greater than 21. So here you can see it's not the by default error which is shown, which was shown earlier. Now you have customized this error message in terms of how you want it in the outcome. You can see the age you want or the age you entered is incorrect. So I can do retry. So this is how I can customize my error message into my data validation when the data is not specifying a certain rule which needs to be validated. So here you can see that this is how it works. So this is what the data validation with respect to the second question which we wanted to solve. The question was that the age must be greater than 21 and this is the data validation rule set over here. So this was all about the second question, the second data validation implementation. Now let's proceed further and understand what is the next validation which we want to implement. The employee joining date. Now obviously employee must be hired, employee must be joined on a particular date in an organization. So the employee joining date must be less than the current date. Now what kind of rule do you think so I will implement over here? Now you can see that the employee joining date, as per the rule, what is the rule? That the employee joining date must be less than the current date. So obviously I'll try to insert a column known as joining date. So I'll do Ctrl++ because I don't have a plus key separately into my keyboard. Again, if you have a plus separate key, you can use Ctrl+. Now what I want a column known as joining date. Now in this, what I want to restrict that the joining date must be less than today's date or the current date. So I select this range and I go in data validation. I'll go in settings and in this settings, as you see, there is no validation implemented on those cells and any value is being selected. I go over here. Now there is something called as date as an element. Now I don't want date to be between this or between that and so on. So I want the date to be less than. Now less than what? I can insert a date. Let's say what's the date today? 16th of October 2024. When I insert, so let's say I write 10, 13, 2024, it's accepted. Now if I write 10, 19, 2024, that is 19th of October, obviously it is going to restrict me because I mentioned that the joining date of the employee must be less than the current date. So, what do you think so? This is a date related restriction which we can implement, but the thing is, every time I need to change this function. Why? Because every time the current date is going to change. So I cannot keep a static value because when I select and I go in data validation, you can see this is a static element. So this is a fixed date. And always, let's say tomorrow I'm opening this file and I'm trying to insert the data, it will obviously look for a date to be inserted after this. Or let's say tomorrow I'm opening this file and I want the data validation to be implemented. So the date will obviously look that it should be less than the given date. Obviously, it is going to look that it should be less than 16th of October 2024. But I don't think so that I want 16th of October to be a fixed value. I want this date to be changing on a daily basis. So you know that there is a function known as what? Today, which we have. Now today, what this function do? The function helps me to get the current date of my particular day. So here if you can see, I have entered today, and here when I type it 10 and let's say I give 20th and I do 2024. So you can see it's restricting because the today's date is what? If I just type in today separately over here, you could see the today's date is what? Today's date is 16th of October 2024. Now the restriction which is asked over here is less than the today's date. Let's say tomorrow I open this file, this date is going to be what? This date is going to be 17. After 10 days, if I open this file, this date is going to be 26. So every day, this date is going to change. Why? Because today feature will exactly grab the current date when the file is being used. So in this formula, if you see this question, what it was asked, the question was the employee joining date must be less than the current date. So if I give the rule with respect to the first option which I tried, it will have that static date of 16th of October 2024. So every day if I open this file, I need to change the date element, but I don't want to do it as such. So I have used today as a function which will give the date in general on a daily basis for the file, and this will allow the restrictions of this data. So this is how I have implemented a date related operation, and we have seen how do we implement or how do we solve the third question with respect to the data validation, which was that the employee's joining date must be less than the current date. So as saw that we have discussed the first three questions, that how I can insert an employee IDs between 1001 to 2000, age must be greater than 21, and the employee joining date must be less than the current date or the today's date which is happening. So now the fourth question focuses on the department related information to be filled. So the department needs to be from the provided list, which means there is no specific department names given to us. There is a list of department names which is provided to us into a sheet, and we want to make sure that whatever we try to implement must be within those sheets. Now you must be seeing this kind of approach into the Google Forms, that when I try to select certain regions such as Mumbai or Chennai or Bangalore or Delhi, you could see the elements or the ranges with respect to that particular cells. So you would not be able to select something apart from this range of cells which are there. So how you will try to do, or how you will try to select or create those kind of approach where you are selecting only, or you are allowing only those elements from a specified list of cells or list of elements. So if I go over here, as the question suggests, that the name of the department must be within the provided list. So here you can see there is a sheet known as dropdown, and you can see there is a department names given to me, that admin, HR, finance, marketing, sales, and IT. So I want the restriction of the values to be inserted within this range of cells only from the list of elements which are provided. Now, what are the list of elements which are provided? The admin, the HR, the finance, the marketing, the sales, and the IT department names. So this is what I want to restrict. Now this restriction is something slightly different from the rest of them. So I'll select this range of cells till where I want to apply the restrictions. I'll go in data validation over here, and instead of any value, now we have seen how a whole number works, we have seen how a decimal works, we have seen how a date related operation works. But in order to just select the range of values, the range of cells, only from a specified list of elements or specified numbers or specified values, what you will do is we have an option known as list. Now in this option known as list, you could see that when I do list in cell drop down, so in this how you will do is, I want the list of elements, let's say now these are values which I want, so I'm giving it into quotes. Now what is the first elements which I want to give? The first element is, let's say the first department which we had is, let's say I write sales, I write IT, I write marketing, then there is finance department, and then there is an HR department, and then there is an admin department. So here you can see every department value I have separated with a comma. So this is the first element, comma, the second element, the third, fourth, fifth, and so on. So these are the specified names from where I want to select. I don't want to give any between element. I don't want to give less than or greater than. There are certain set of restrictions where I just wanted to select the rules or the values only from the list of elements provided. So I've selected it and I do OK. So you can see a box which is available to us. This box is known as a drop down box. Now what's a drop down box? That when you click on this, you could see that these elements are available. Sales, IT, marketing, finance, HR, and admin. So could you see over here that this is how it looks? Now I'm giving in quotes. So this is available to us in quotes. I can change the elements. I can go in data validation, and instead of giving it into quotes, I can give such as sales, IT, marketing, finance, HR, and then there is something called as admin. So I can give that. There is a drop down list. You can see there is sales. You can see I can select something from IT. You can see something from marketing could be selected, something from finance could be selected, and something from the HR and admin. But if I try to insert a value apart from those list of elements, let's say I have a department known as research and development. So is it going to accept? No. Why it is not going to accept? Because now the restrictions are limited, that it will only allow the limited set of values which I want. So restricted or specified values which are available to us in terms of drop down. So this will not be accepted. If I write it in small case, it will still throw me error. Why? Because it's not required for us in terms of small case, because you see the sales elements which is possibly available to us in is the S is capital over here. So this is how this restriction follows. But I will not go over here. Let's say there were very less number of departments, so I was able to write it manually. But let's say there are 30 departments, 40 departments, 50 departments as such. And you must have seen in the real world that when you go and select a drop down list, you get n number of elements into that. But if someone sits and type it manually, it becomes very challenging task. So in order to do this, how we do it? So I'll go in data validation. I will remove the elements. I'll select the data validation part. Now, instead of typing each element over here, I know that in this feature or in this sheet, there are values, or there is a column where the values which I want to restrict into that cells are possibly written down or noted down. I want to select only from those ranges. So how I will do it? As you can see, I am in the data validation. If I change the sheet, in the source tab, you can see the sheet name which is possibly available with an exclamation mark. Now, this is one of the important question, that how you will get to know that the element is being selected from a different sheet. Obviously, this is a restriction, or this is a way you will get to know that how an element is selected from a different sheet. So there is a sheet name and an exclamation mark. So as we want to implement on the data validation sheet, if I come on the data validation sheet where I want to implement, there is no thing written into the source. But when I shift the sheet, or when I switch into another sheet, you can see the sheet name and an exclamation mark. Now, as you know, with this cursor, I am trying to select certain cells, and you could see the cells are being selected. Now, what's this dollar symbol? We'll discuss it later. But you can see the range of cells is being selected. And I just have to do OK. So here you can see the same thing is possibly available to us. Sales, marketing, HR, and so on. So here you can see if I want to give IT, you can see that IT is also possibly available. Now, if I go into the sheet from where I have selected the region in order to create that drop down, and instead of, let's say, sales, I added a department known as research. Now, is it going to showcase the changes into the part where the validation is being applied for the list of elements? You can see yes. So instead of sale, what has been mentioned? It has mentioned research. Why? Because I have not written the value statically, which means a fixed value in the drop down list. I have selected a range of cells from where it will copy the values which are being stored into those range of cells. And over there, if I do the changes are obviously going to reflect into my drop down part. So there are certain instances which can happen, and we don't want this to happen. So what I can do is I can log those cells, I can hide this sheet, or I can restrict that no one can see this sheet. So I can protect this sheet as such, but I'll try to log those cells. If you can see now in data validation, if I go, so these are the fixed department. I don't want anyone to come and change the values over here, so that it won't be reflected into the data validation drop down. So what I can do, I just want to fix this cells, which means log this cells entirely. Now locking over here, which means that I want to protect those cells in order to make changes, or in order to make the value entry which is there. So how I will do it? First of all, I'll select the entire sheet. So this arrow will help me to select the entire sheet, or anywhere within the outside cell I can do Control A. But what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to select it from this small triangle which is available over here. So I can select the entire sheet. and I'll press Control key. Now with the Control key long press, I'll select the regions what I want to lock. So these are the cell ranges which I want to lock. So I've selected those cell ranges which I want to lock, and I'll press Control and 1. So Control and 1 will give me formatting cell options. I can select from here, or what I could possibly do, I can go in Home tab and then there is this option which will help me to get the same thing. So Control 1 is a shortcut key for getting the format cell options, formatting options. Now in this, I don't want to go in number formatting, alignment, font, border, fill. I don't want to go into this. I want to go in protection. Now you can see protection mein there is something called as locked, because I want to lock these cells. Locked, and I do OK. But it's still not done because I want to go into the Review tab and go into the protected sheet, and then there will be two options selected that you have to lock those cells, and when you select it, it will unlock the cells. Now I'll do OK, and here if I change the finance into research department, you can see that these cells are being locked completely. So if you try to change the values, it will not possibly help us to do. So this drop down list which we have created on the basis of this range cells is not going to change, which we saw earlier, which was changing. So this is how you can create a drop down list. First, by implementing the values individually. Second, by selecting the range of cells. Third, by locking the range of cells so the values within the range of cells would not be changed. So this is a drop down list related to the fourth question which we were trying to solve. Now what was that question? That the departments which needs to be inserted for those employees should be amongst the given list of departments which are possibly available to us. And this is how we have restricted the value to be entered over here. So this was all about the data validation with respect to the drop down elements. Now let's try to understand the next question, the fifth question, that contact details of the employee must be a 10-digit numeric value. Now what do you think so? That if I have a contact detail, or I being an employee, and I have to share my contact detail with the organization, obviously I will share it in terms of numbers, and contact details is a 10-digit number. If one digit is less, one digit is more, it will be incorrect number, and I won't be getting any mails or any messages which are coming from the organization or anything as such. So if I want to restrict that when a person enters the data, that data needs to follow the format that it should have a 10-digit contact number. So I'll try to insert a column over here again with Control Shift plus, and let's say I'll write contact number as a column, and here I'm trying to apply restriction. So when I go over here, I select it, I went into the data tab and go into the data validation. Instead of any value, I am selecting something called as text length, because now I want to calculate the length. As we have studied the length as a function earlier, what does length do? Length will calculate number of characters in the given element. Now, I don't want between, I want equals to. Equals to what? I want the length to be matching equals to the 10 numbers. And I do OK. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there are 9 elements. What is the error message coming? The value does not match the data validation restrictions. Why it is not matching? Because the value which I require is a 10-digit length character. So let me do retry, and if I enter 0, you could see it's entering. So 3, 4, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I enter, it's entering, let's say 9, 9. So if I'm trying to enter, it's entering. So it will not allow, okay. So that's fine. But if I allow anything apart from numbers, ठीक है 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. So you can see anything apart from numbers is also being accepted, because what is a restriction which I try to incorporate over here? That the contact number must be a 10-digit number. So, but here when I try to implement the data validation, what it had implemented over here, that the length must be 10. Did I mention that it will have number, it will have text? I didn't mention anything as such. I just mentioned that the length must be what? 10. So this rule is complete, it's not completely applicable, it's halfway there. Why? Because it is just checking that the length of the data which you enter, is it matching to 10 or not. It is not checking, or it is not accepting that it is only the number, or it should only accept numbers. So the restriction rule seems to be incomplete over here. So let's try to complete it. But before implementing, let's see what operations we can do over here and how we can implement the condition which we want. So if I have a number, let's say 996906981. Let's say I have this number which I want, and I'll do equals to, I'll do the len of this. So what is the len of this? It's 10. So if the condition over here, if the length of this cell is equals to 10, the condition is true. And that's why the data validation which we implemented over here was accepting this rule when the value was 10. But if I give any number, let's say A over here, is it changing? Is the true changing? No, because still the length is only being checked. The length of the characters over here is what? It's 10, and that's being accepted. But what do I require? I require that it should only be number. So we have one more function known as isNumber, which is used to check. Now, whichever functions are associated with is means, is it according to the criteria or the condition? So it will obviously give us the answer as true or false. So I will write is what? Is number. You could see checks whether the value is number and returns true or false. So it is just checking, is it a number or not? So is number, and I pass in the value, and you could see that it's giving me false. So as per the question which I want to implement data restriction, what is the question? That the phone number must be a 10-digit character, that is correct. But it should also be number. It should not have any other part apart from number. So if I insert 90 over here, can you see both the conditions which are true? So I want both the conditions to be true when I am trying to insert any value into the cells and that restriction I want to give. In order to do this, we have studied logical operations. Now you must be knowing logical operation test the condition either by giving the answer as true or either by giving the answer as false. And it will do something else. If the true is satisfied, it will give something else if the false is satisfied. We have also studied an approach of AND. Now what does AND say? That if we implement multiple conditions, all must be true. Then and only then the final answer is going to be true. That's what we want over here. the first statement which I want to check, the first condition or the first logic which I want to check, that is the length of the number equals to 10? If yes, okay, fine. Then check the another logic. What is another logic which I want to check? Is the set of text which is given to it all are numbers or not? This is what I wanted to check. So over here, how I can do is, I will select this range of cells and I'll implement the data validation. But here, as you see, the approaches which I used, what was the question which I said? That the length of the characters or the length of the elements which is being passed must be 10. That's the first logic which I want to check. And the next logic which I want to check is nothing but the elements which are being passed needs to be numeric. So how I would check is, I will not use only the length over here, because I don't need to just check the length, I need to check the number as a factor over here as well. So here I cannot be only reliable on text length. I need to use something called as custom. What is a custom over here? Now if you can see the list of values, the list of restrictions which are provided, I can select any ones among them. But what if I want to customize the restriction approach and I want to proceed further? So for that, we will use something called as custom. Now when I do custom, I don't want this to be there. So what I'm going to use in terms of custom is, I'll use equals to, because I'm using a formula. Now what formula I do want over here? That's and. And now and with respect to what? Now the first part, what is the first logical test which I want? I want length of this. So length of this element must be equals to what? Must be equals to 10. So that's the first condition which I want to check. The first logic which I want to check with the element which is being passed. It could be true, it could be false. If it is true, then check the another logic. If it is false, the final answer is going to false and it is not going to accept this range. Now, let's say the length is what? Is 10 for that particular character. But I want to give one more assurance. That one more assurance or one more logical testing is it a number or is it a numeric value? So I'll give a comma. That will add one more logical test. Now, what is a one more logical? Now you don't need to write equals to over here. So what is the another logic? Is it number? Is number. So I'll select this and I'll close the bracket and I'll do OK. And when I try to enter, let's say 998767560, it's not, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And let me give one more character. Is it accepting? Yes. But if I give A, and then I pass in number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. So here if you can see, the length of the element is 10. But it's not a number. So both the conditions are not being satisfied. Here we have not just seen a basic approach of implementing a len function or a text len, but here we saw that how we can customize an approach in terms of data validation. So this is how it looks. So as we saw now that how we can implement a data validation restriction where it is not accepting only one criteria, but there was one more criteria which is being asked or which is being said. Here, we tried to customize the approach how a data could be validated and not by the basic approaches of validation. So this is how we saw that how a customized approach worked. But let's try to see one more question over here, that email ID of the employee needs to have a domain as @xyz.com. As you must be knowing that employees have an IDs or the values which are there. When you enter their emails, the email formats look same, that the name @ and after that the organization name.com. So that's what I wanted to check, that there is a specified format which needs to be maintained with respect to the email IDs of the employee, that it should search or it should find that @xyz.com is possibly available or not. So I'll escape, and here, so what I'll do, I'll try to implement. Now we have this email as a column. Now what does this email as a column needs to be searching? Needs to be searching @xyz.com. So here, how we will do it? Here I have selected this cells. I'll go in data validation, and then instead of any value, now I don't have anything. Let's say there is no list of elements. This is not a whole number. This is not a decimal as such. There is no list of elements which I want, no drop downs as such. Date, no date related element, nothing related to time, and nothing related to text length as well. Obviously, I have an approach of what? A customized option. Now, customize in terms of what? Now, this is, I want to find a element into the range of cells. So we have something called as find, we have something called as search. You must be knowing, before implementing find and all, you know that if I do equals to and if I do find, you can see it starts to find a particular string from a length of string. But it's case sensitive, which means if you give XYZ, it will find only that. It's not if capital X is observed, that will also be found. So this kind of approach I require. There is something called as search, which will also search the element from the text which you provide, but it's not case sensitive, which means instead of small xyz, I typed in capital XYZ, it will still search for it. So I'll use an approach of what? Find over here. So I will select this range of cells and I'll go in data validation. In this data validation, I'll go in custom, and in this custom, what I will try to do, I'll try to use something called as find. Find what? Find @. Now @xyz.com is what I want to find. Find from where? Find from this cell. And I do okay. The formula currently has error because it's blank. If there is a blank, it will show you that. So if I write, let's say my name @xyz.com, will it accept? Yes. But if I write some other name, let's say @ and if I write Imarticus.com, is it going to accept? No, because the search element, the finding element which I want over here is what is related to @xyz.com. So I am searching only that particular domain into the text range which is there. And that's why any other part or any other domain email element, if I add, it is showing me a restriction which is there. So here I have again tried to customize an approach in terms of data validation, but this customization is respect to the text element. We have an option known as find, which will find a particular text string into a big range of strings. So it will find for an element. What I'm trying to find? @xyz.com. So that I'm going to find over here. And then after that, why I'm using find is because I want the case sensitiveness to be there, which means it needs to be in small case, xyz.com. And why I'm not selecting a search operation over here? Because when I try to do search operation over here, obviously it is going to search the data only basis of the value, not on the basis of cases. Which means if I give capital xyz.com, still it will accept it. And if I give small xyz.com, it will still accept it. I don't want that approach to be there with respect to search. So I have used a customized approach with respect to find. So this is how we can customize that I want to search a particular element into the text which is there. If it is there, it will accept. If it is not there, it is going to reject for us. And as we can see in the example that when I passed in my email ID, jagritipaushe@xyz.com, it was accepting. But when I typed rashijain@imarticus.com, it's not going to accept it. Why? Because the domain which I was trying to search was XYZ, not imarticus.com. So this was all about the restriction which we want to apply with respect to find. We can also apply with respect to search if you don't want the case sensitivity to be there. So this was the question which we tried to solve. Now let's try to look further for the next questions which are possibly available to us. Now, if you could see the next questions which we have, the next question is, gender column can only consist male and female value entries, which means the column of gender can only have male, one of the value, or female as another value. Nothing apart from that. Now we have seen that with the departments as a column that only specified values are accepted. Apart from that, nothing is being accepted. So the same approach we'll try to take it over here. So let's see how it works. So I go in gender as a column, and in this, what I want to do is I want to implement a restriction. Now this restriction will only be that I will accept gender as male or gender as female. So two categories could only be possibly available to us. So in order to do that only specified value needs to be there, I need to create a drop-down list. So I'll go in data validation. Instead of any value, I'll have a list of elements. Now, instead of going to source, because there is no source where those values are available, they said that it would be either male or it would be either female. So I can just type in that male, comma, female. And I do OK. So here, if you could see that it is asking me male, it's fine. And then another drop down is what? Female. That's fine, but here the spelling is wrong. So I can go over here. I can go in data validation and change the spelling. So female. And I do OK. And you could see female. And here, if you could see what it is accepting, female, which is there. So these are certain rules according to which we can implement the data validations. So we have tried to cover the 7th question which is there. But here, if I want any other value, it will not allow. Why? Because I have restricted that it is going to be only male and female. And in this, when I try to implement validation, I don't need to lock any cells or anything. Why? Because when I tried to insert, these are the fixed value which I gave into the validation rule within. So it's not replacing any value because I've not selected any cells. So I don't need to lock any cell, protect the sheet or anything as such. I can directly write the values which I want into the list of elements to be accepted, and that values would be accepted. So this is how we tried to solve the 7th question with respect to we have to only accept those genders which are either male or either female. So this was all about the drop down list. So this is how a drop down is created. Now if you could see the another question which we have, the project code must be a 4-letter starting with A. So it must be a 4-letter character. Now let's say I'll have a project code A103. So it's a 4-letter element or 4-letter string, but the first letter must be an A. That's what I require over here. So if I want to give that kind of restrictions, how I would give? First of all, before implementing that, let's see how we can break down those questions. Imagine That project code is A103, A104, and then there is A109. Now there is B106. Obviously, what is my restriction? That it should be a 4 letters code, and in that 4 letter, the first letter must be A. So the first letter must be what? A. And let's say I say that the rest of the 3 must be a number. So how I can check? Obviously, in order to give those kind of restriction, I have to customize, because I don't have anything which will give me this kind of restriction. So I definitely need to customize an approach. But before customizing directly, let's see how does it will be happening. So first of all, what's the first criteria? That the length must be, so the length must be 4. So the length of the text which I want is what? It must be 4. Now the next criteria which I want is, first, if the length is 4, check the first letter. Is it A? Second, if I want to check that the first letter needs to be A, I have checked. Now, the next criteria which I will definitely check is the last 3 elements must be number. So that's the criteria which I have set. That now you can see, first of all, I want the length to be 4. Secondly, I want the character at the first position to be A. Thirdly, and very important, that I want the values to be a number. How I could do it? So you must be knowing that we have certain functions which we can use, and all the 3 conditions needs to be true in order to insert those values. So how I will do is, I'll write equals to, according to the first condition, I'll check what the length. So what is the length of this? It's 4. If I add one more element over here, that's 5. So you could see the length is being found. Now I'm trying to compare. Now what's the comparison which I want to give? Is length of this element as per the condition. What's the condition? Length must be 4, which means the outcome of this, if I select this range, you could see it's showing me what? 5. I can do function and F9. It will show me what is the answer coming from this function. It's 5. I'll do Control Z to go back again to the function. I want to apply a test. What's the testing logic which I want to apply? Length must be 4, which means this value, this outcome needs to be matching with what? 4. If I do this, what it is telling me? That it's false. Why? Because A1047, the length over there is not 4, and that's why the condition is coming false. So the first condition is false, the rest of the condition doesn't matter over here, because I want the letter length to be 4. So here I have tested. So here you can see in the rest of them it's showing me true. Now let's check the another criteria. First letter, is it A? So I want to check the first character, is it A or not? Now how I can get the first character from the text which I want? We know the text function, right? We have left and right. Now first means starting element. Needs to be what? A. So obviously I will extract the data from the start. In order to extract the text element or the values or the elements from the start, what we use a function known as left. So returns a specified number of characters from the start of the string. Now left. What's the left of this? So if I don't pass anything, by default it is taking the first character. So can you see that by default it has extracted what? A for us. So this is being extracted. Now, if I write 2, it will extract what? It will extract the first 2. First 2 is what? A and 1. That will be extracted. But what's the condition? First letter, is it A? That's what I want to check. So I'll write left from the start of the text. Consider the first character. So what's the first character? A. Now it's coming, I want to compare. Is it A? Is it means I want to check. If the outcome is A, it will be true. If the outcome is not, it will be false. So I'll do equals to, and in quotes, I'll check that is it A? So you could see that yes, true. The condition, what it is there, it's what? It's an A. True. Now you can see over here it's false. Why? Because the first condition, the first letter over here is not A, it's B. Now the next element, the last element must be, the last 3 elements must be numbers. Now I got to know that how I can get the text from the start. How I can get the text from the end, that end will also be last 3. So how I would check? Last 3 would possibly be the right element which is there, because right extract the elements from the behind or from the end. So I have some function known as right. So returns the specified number of characters from the length of the text string, from the end of the text string. So what is there? The last 3 elements. So I want to do is what? Right of this. And what are the last 3 elements? Last 3 elements needs to be 3. So what are the last 3 elements? 0, 4, 7. If I extract this is there. But what it is telling me, the last 3 elements must be number. I can say yes, they are numbers, but I want to give a validity that is it true or not. So in order to check that, we have something called as is number which we can use. So I'll write is and number. So if I do this, if you see is number, right of this. What's the right of this? You could see over there. It's in strings. It's in quotes. 0, 4, 7. Obviously, it's a number, but why it is showing me in string? Because it was collectively written with a text. So the entire element is a string. If you want to see what it is there with respect to extracting this, I'll do function and F9 key. You could see that what it is showing me, quotes 0, 4, 7, which means it's not a number, it's a text being thrown. So if I do Control Z, so if I see the final answer of this, is it number? Because if I write 0, 4, 7 into strings, obviously it is going to be a text. It's not a number. And the answer over here comes as false. But what is the question which I asked, or what is the criteria which I want? The last 3 elements must be number. It's a number, but it is showing me what? The outcome is false. So if you see, the outcome is what? The outcome is false. What I want to do over here is I want to use another function. Now what's the another function which I want to use is here. What I will do, I'll use a function known as value. Now what does value as a function do? It converts a text string that represents a number to a number. Because into my text there is a number and I want to convert it into a number, because by default it is shown it into text. So I will use this and I'll close my bracket over here, that this entire answer, the answer which I give from the right, needs to be converted into a number, and you can see now it's being converted into a number format. So when I do enter, you could see that it's showing me true. And then there is true, true, true. Now, as per the criteria, as per the condition, what I wanted to check is, first is the length must be equals to 4. So for the first value, the answer is false. Now, if the length is not equals to 4, how does it matter that the first character is A or not? Because the criteria is not met. So, this true doesn't make sense. But if you see the next example, A109, if you can see the length is true, yes. The first letter is A, yes. And the next element which is there is what? It's yes, that it's true. So, all the condition is true, so that value needs to be accepted. Now, if you see over here, length must be 4, then this text character must be false, and then this over here, it's not a 3-digit number. So, here you can see the first condition that the length is 4 is true. The second condition that the first character is A is false, and the third condition, which is the length of elements, that the last 3 are numbers, it's true. But all the conditions, all the criteria are not true. The second criteria, that the first letter must be A, is false. So how I can proceed? Now you know, still I'll use some approach known as AND. Because if all the conditions are met at that particular time, I can say yes, the value would be accepted. If any one condition falls, then the value needs not to be accepted. So how I will use it? Let's try to use it over here. But this I wanted to show separately before implementing the formula in general. Why? Because if I directly implement the formula, it will be complicated in terms of understanding. So how I will do it? Let's say I'll create one more column known as project ID. And I'll drag it over here. So what's the criteria which I want? Now in terms of giving this home, I'll give a border over here, and in this what I wanted to do is I want to implement a formatting, a validation. So if I go over here, I cannot use whole number, decimal, list, date, time, text length, nothing. I have to use something called as custom. Now in this custom, I will customize it. So how I will customize it? I'll write equals to, and I'll write an approach of what? An AND. So with this AND, what I'm trying to do is, I am first checking according to the criteria which we mentioned. Just check it again. What did we first check? That the length must be 4. The second check, the first character is A. The third check, the last 3 elements must be number. So let's go check by check. So here I have selected the range of elements. I'll go in data validation. Instead of any value, I'll go in custom. And in this custom, in this formula, I'll write and in this AND, what is the first check? That the length must be equals to 4. So I will write len as a function, and in this len as a function, I'll select this cell, and this cell length needs to be 4. So if the answer is true, it will proceed with the next logic check. If the answer is false, no logic check is required for the further. Why? Because it's AND. If all the conditions are true, then and only then the final answer is going to be true. So the length of the code which I implement needs to be 4. Now, what is the next check which I wanted to do? That the first character needs to be A. In order to set the first character, so I'll take and extract the first character from left. So I'll select this. From this text, the first character, that is a starting character, would be fetch, and this needs to be what? This needs to be A. So that's the next logic check. So if the project code is having a length of 4, then check is the first character A. If then it is true, then proceed with the next check. If it is not true, then stop it over there and don't accept the value. That's the criteria. So now if you can see, this is there. Now what's the third check? I want to see that the last 3 elements, are they number or not? And we see and we saw how it is checked. So I'll write is, and I'll write what? Number. In that is number, I used a value function. Why? Because A104 which I used was showing me in general a text. but it's not a text, it's a number. So if into strings there is a number but it is showing a value as text or the data element as text, I can use a value function to convert that text into a number. So I'll use value, and in that value I want to extract from the end. End means from the last of the string. So we have something called as write. Write is, I'll select this, write what? Last 3. So I'll close the write bracket, I'll close the value bracket, and I'll close the is number bracket, which is there. So here first what it will do, it will extract the last 3 elements from the text. Then after that what it is going to do, if it is 007, so, and it will obviously show in string, so value as a function will convert a string to a numeric value, and then is number. Once it is converted, it will check that is it number or not. And then this entire check has happened. So let's close the AND function over here, and I do OK. So here if I insert A109, is it accepted? Yes. But if I do B108, will it be accepted? No. Why? Because as per the criteria, what's the first check? That the length must be 4. Second check, you can see the length 4 is satisfied. When it went to the second logic check, what's the second logic check? That the letter must be A, the first letter, but the first letter is not A. So there is no point of seeing another criteria or another condition. So if I write A10789, obviously the length of the project code is not a 4-digit number. When I do over here, you can see this value does not match the data validation restriction defined for the cell. Why? Because the first criteria itself is incorrect. So it's false. So it has not checked the rest of the criteria. If I write A, and even though the length is 4, the first character is A, but the last 3 characters are not numbered, and then over here you can see it's still showing the restrictions because the last condition, the last rule or the last logical test is not satisfied. So this is how you can customize the data validation rule in order to implement the data validation operations. So this was all about how you can customize with respect to different criteria and conditions with respect to your data validation approach. So as we now saw over here that lots of variation in terms of how a data validation could be given, how you can implement data validation with the set of rules which are possibly available over there, or how you could customize the rule in order to give the data validation approach or the data validation restriction. How you can insert an input message, how you can modify the error message which is there. So similarly, what we will try to look, I try to show you a simple approach of creating a dependent drop-down. Now what's a dependent drop-down? I show you what's a drop-down. I showed you what's a drop-down. Now drop-down was from those list of elements the values would be selected. Now what's a dependent drop-down? If I want to give you with an example, if you can see, I have the sheet, and from this sheet we extracted that the department names. It should be admin, it should be HR, it should be finance, it should be marketing, it should be sales, and it should be IT. You could see this values that in admin department, the designation which I have is a data admin. In the HR department, I have certain designations such as HR executive, senior HR manager, generalist, assistant, whatever. So similarly, for the rest of the departments, I have certain designations to be there. Now, when I implement a data validation, let's say I create a column over here known as designation. So let me write it down. So designation of an employee for that particular department, you could see it's showing me IT and all. I don't want this rule to be implemented. So I'll select this and I'll go over here and let me remove the data validation. So I'll go in list and any value, or I can clear all the data validation and I do OK. So no data validation has been possibly available because I tried to insert a column, the data validation was there at that particular position. That's why it was shown. Now you can see these departments are available from which I can see. Now when I select IT department, the designation drop-down list should only show me the designations related to IT. It should not show all the designations, which means it should not show data admin, it should not show HR, it should not show finance related. It should only show me what the IT related designations which are possibly available to me. Which means I want my drop-down list to be dependent. Now, dependent on what? I want this to be dependent on the department names. So, how I will create that kind of approach in terms of drop-down? So, I'll go in data validation, and you could see that when I select finance, the department name should show. Now let's see how you can implement. If I go with the basic approach, I've selected this cells, I'll go in data validation. With respect to any value, I'll go in list, and in this I'll go in source. I'll go source over here, and you could see that I'm selecting this range. So this is a source from where I'm getting the data, and I do okay. Here you can see okay. The list of source must be delimited list or reference or a single row or single column, which means I cannot have this kind of approach over here. I cannot select multiple columns, multiple values into my drop down. So how I could possibly use those elements into my drop down? So first of all, let me close it and let's create it again. So before creating it, I'll give a name range. Now what's a name range? That this cell will have its name as admin. This range of cells will have its name as HR. This range of cells will have their name as finance. How I can do is, I can select the cells and I can give the name over here in the name box. That will possibly do it. But if I don't want to go with that approach, the first column has the name cells and it should be matching with the department names, and with respect to that, it will help us to create that dependent drop down. So how I could do is, first of all, let me select this cells. I've selected this with the cursor and I'll long press Control. After pressing long press Control, what I'll do, I'll select the rest of them. So you could see rest of them is selected. So what I could possibly do is, I could go into formulas. Now what the formula as a data tab will help me to do over here. Now, as we have seen multiple validation rules with respect to the basic restrictions which we can put into my data or which we can use into my data which needs to be inserted, or with respect to certain customization approaches where we can customize the use of data entry into my data or into my cell range according to the criteria or the condition which I required. Now, we have seen the drop-down list as well, selecting from different sheet, putting the drop-down elements individually and creating the drop-down list for the same. But let's try to see another approach in terms of drop-down, which was nothing but a dependent drop-down. Now, what's a dependent drop-down? Dependent drop-down is something where one drop-down feature would be dependent on the another. Now, what does that mean and how it will show the dependent feature? Let's try to understand. Now, if you could see in the drop-down list values, I have this designations. Let's say I am belonging from an admin department. So, the designation which will be possibly available to us would be data admin. Now, if I am a person who is into an HR department, so the designation which will possibly available to me would be HR executive, senior HR manager, and so on. Similarly, for the rest of the departments, you can see the designations which are possibly available. Now, when I try to insert a value, if you can see, when I try to select finance department and when I try to select the designation which I require, obviously the designation must be only visible with respect to a finance department. So how that could be possible? let's try to first insert a designation column and then see how we can create this kind of drop down. So I've selected a column over here. I'll do Control Shift plus and I'll add a column and I'll name it as designation. So I've named it as designation. If you could see that it is showing me admin, HR, finance. Why? Because it has just replicated this column, the cell which is there. So here this data validation is obviously there, but here the data validation also being copied. But I don't want this validation to be there. So I will remove the data validation. Now removal of data validation is very simple. What you could do is select the cell range from where you have implemented the data validation. Go to the data tool. Now you know that before implementing data validation, the criterion was any value. What you have to do the similar approach, that instead of selecting anything, you'll do any value. Or you can sometimes do, let's say it was not any value, it was a list. You can do clear all. So everything would be clear, all the rules would be clear which you have implemented, and the cells goes by default into the any value range which were there initially. So I have removed the data validation, and here when I hover over the cells, you could see that no value or no drop down list is possibly available which was there earlier. So what I will do is I'll select this range of cells and I want to implement a data validation. But in terms of implementing the data validation, what are the designations required? I require this set of designations to be a part into my list. So what I could do is I could go in data validation. Here, if I go into data validation, I'll select list. And I go in source. What's the source for me? The source is this. So I'm selecting from multiple columns. Will it accept it? Let's see that when I press enter and I do OK, you can see the list source must be delimited list or a reference to a single row or single column. You cannot add multiple rows and multiple columns. It could be either single row or single column which is there, but here it's not, and that's why the data validation with respect to the drop down data validation with respect to selection of designation is not being accepted. So what I would do in order to create that dependent drop down, so what I could possibly do is when I select a particular department, let's say finance, the designation drop down should only show me designations related to finance. So how that will proceed? First of all, I want to give the name to the cells. Let's say data admin is a designation for the admin department. So I want this admin name to be selected. This needs to be HR. So when I select HR, this value would be shown to me. So how I can proceed with it is, first I'll give name ranges. I can give name ranges by selecting the cells and typing in directly over here, or I could use a shortcut for this. So in order to use that shortcut, first I'll select it. I'll use control, long press control and select the rest of them. So I've selected the rest of the cells and I want to create a name range directly. So you can go in formulas. You can go create from selection. So it will help you to create a name range. And then there is a shortcut key which you can see. So I can select. So what do I want? I want top row as a part of my name range name, which means this range of cells will be named as admin. This below range of cells will be named as HR and so on. So I do OK. And here if you see in the name box, can you see admin? When I select admin, it is going over there. When I select HR, it is selecting the range of cells. When I select marketing, it is selecting the range of cells which are there. So this name ranges are created and this name ranges needs to be matching the department names which we have, so that this dependent drop down would be possibly available. Why? Because it's dependent on that name. So how we can now implement a data validation? So what you have to do is, you have to select these values. You have to go in data tab, data validation. Instead of any value, I'll select list, and in this list, I'll use a function known as indirect. Now, what's an indirect function helpful for me? Indirect function will indirectly locate to the particular name and name range, and it will give me the outcome which are stored into those name range. So, I will use indirect equals to indirect. And indirect what? Indirect this name of the department, and I do OK. So now you could see that the designations over here are available with respect to finance department. Now if I select the department as marketing, is my designation list values changing? Yes, you could see that the designations are possibly available to us in terms of marketing. Now, if I select the designation, the department as sales, you could possibly find out the designations available into the sales department. So what was this? This was a dependent drop down. So you can create a basic drop down as well as a dependent drop down, which will help us to find out a drop down list dependent on certain feature or certain cell values which are there. So this is how a dependent drop down works, and this was all about the data validation which we have studied. So we can apply rules, we can apply multiple conditions, multiple criteria in order to make sure that the wrong data is not being entered and the data is being validated before it is being entered. So this was all about data validation from us.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel and comment on the concept you want to learn next.